根据《华尔街日报》的报道，美国联准会渴望在今年的11月份开始逐步减少购债的规模，也就是启动缩表。市场更预期2023年可能会开始升息。今天的关键对话特别请来债券天王的潜力接班人，来解析联准会的货币政策，分享资产配置的know-how。
关键时刻掌握关键对话。大家好，我是杨志杰。投资最重要的就是要观察资金的动能了。而美国联准会主席鲍尔最新表示，通膨是暂时的，因此没有立刻升息的风险。不过会在今年底之前可能会采取缩减购债规模。这样的讯息到底是因是歌，有没有落后通膨趋势的风险呢？而对固定资产收益投资人来讲，到底应该采取哪些策略？针对这些问题，今天我们为你邀请到的是英国野村资产管理无限制固定收益部门主管贺玉成，他可是有着下一个债券天王的美称。我们一起欢迎 Richard。Hello, Richard. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Taiwan. How are you?
The Federal Reserve Chair Powell said at the Jackson Hole Symposium that the Fed could begin slowing down asset purchases this year as the U.S. economy recovers from the pandemic. But there's no rush to raise interest rates. What is your opinion on the Fed's monetary policy? Hawkish or dovish? And do you think Fed is at the risk of behind the curve?
Well, I think the market has chosen to take this as a dovish sign for capital prices. And we've seen as a result of this, bond yields have been stable. Equity markets have continued to push towards the higher levels and the all-time highs. So the market have chosen to see this as dovish. The fact of the matter is, though, we are at the beginning of a phase where tapering is coming through. The amount of assets that have been purchased and the type of assets purchased by the Federal Reserve is going to get less. So at some stage, we're expecting an increase in volatility and some weakness in asset prices. But again, we don't perceive this to be happening in the immediate future. But it's certainly something on the horizon, and it's certainly something that we're already discounting within the fund that I'm managing. It's reasonable to expect at some stage the level of interest rates should go back faster to the level they were prior to the pandemic and lockdown of March 2020. And so in that case, I believe the dots, there's a very high chance the dots and the extent of the interest rates will actually go higher and will come forward. So yes, in very short, I believe the interest rates will go higher and sooner as the pressure mounts on the Federal Reserve and the voting members to take appropriate action against the higher level of inflation.
So we might be able to see the Fed starting to reduce its QE program later this year. What is the impact on global bond market?
Well, it depends on how the Fed go about this and the speed at which they go about this. Obviously, a short, sharp cut in quantitative easing and stopping all asset purchases in one instance would lead to some risk-off environment. You've got to also recall that many risk assets benefited from quantitative easing. High-yield asset classes were indicated by Chairman Powell and the Federal Reserve to be included in that basket of bonds and assets available to purchase under the current quantitative easing scheme. So if they put a hard stop in place, then obviously it would be reasonable to expect some of the asset classes that have benefited the most to actually have some of the most weakness. So it really does depend on the speed.
Assuming the Fed starts to raise rates in 2023, we will see a different interest rate environment. And what are the risks and opportunities?
Well, first we have to decide if interest rates are indeed going to be higher in 2 years' time. I'm a firm believer that bond yields, certainly in the US Treasury yields, will be higher than the level that they are today by the end of 2023. As a result of this, I believe that all short-term yields, and if you can look, 2-year US Treasury yields are at 0.2%. I believe that they will be closer to 1.25%, which is where they were in February 2020 prior to the pandemic lockdown. So yes, yields are going higher. Now that gives us an opportunity, and that gives us an opportunity as yields move higher to reinvest at higher levels of yield, lower levels of price It'll give us all the ability to deliver a higher level of income that is achievable currently, given the low level of bond yields, both US Treasuries and corporate bond yields. So it will lead to an opportunity. But first of all, we'll have to expect there will be some capital depreciation and bond prices will go lower in the shorter term. But that indeed, as I said, will give us a greater opportunity towards the end of next year and into 2023 to buy fixed income assets that look considerably more attractive than they are today.
And what's your investment strategy to take advantage of this new interest rate cycle?
First of all, we are going to be short US interest rates for the next 2 years. What I mean this is we are able to deliver positive returns when government bond yields rise, and we've delivered this historically. The other thing that we're doing presently is to try and immunize some of those effects of raising interest rates and rising bond yields by investing in longer duration, longer term, longer maturity, emerging market debt, where the level of yield that we're getting is double digit in some instances, which means we're getting in excess of 10% yields. So the level of income we're achieving is protecting us. And in some instances, yields would have to rise by over 1% every month before we start losing capital return on the fund. So we're looking to deliver returns, immunize ourselves by the use of higher levels of income against potential capital losses. It also means that later in 2022 and in 2023, the level of yield available and the level of income we can achieve from investing in global investment grade credit will be higher then than it is today. So that will give us a greater opportunity later in 22 and 2023 of delivering further capital gains and also delivering a higher level of income distribution to the investors in the fund.
For individual investors in Taiwan, can you give them some advices regarding how to do fixed income investment in coming quarters?
Well, I think over the course of the next coming quarter and towards the end of this year, we're still going to be in a similar sort of environment with regard to the level of bond yields, the level of credit spreads. This is the additional yield that corporate debt gives you. If you believe that the inflation is going to come lower, or if you believe that bond yields are going to remain stable over the course of the remainder of this year, then obviously things like investment grade credit and higher yield assets will deliver a level of income. So if you believe that interest rates are going to remain stable, then these areas are still attractive. We don't envisage you're going to deliver strong capital returns, but you should equally not have any surprises with regard to the level of returns you're getting, or any shock surprises. We also believe that a lot of these emerging markets, as the US dollar remains weak, these emerging markets will also prove beneficial in this sort of environment. Local currency emerging market debt is attractive also, but the problem is, from a retail investor, it's the management of that currency risk. We specialize in using option derivative techniques that are implemented by banks globally, so we can manage that currency volatility. But which is very difficult for a retail investor. But I think this is the areas where you're still going to get a measure of income and capital.
Citywire has nominated you as one of the most potential successors of the Bond King. It represents your performance and reputation. When you make investment decisions, what are the key factors for consideration? How do you seek return in this lower yield environment and control the risk at the same time?
We have to take a measure of risk. Everyone has to take risk. The higher yielding assets are typically lower credit quality. So if you want to buy US high yield or global high yield, Asian high yield, you're automatically investing in riskier asset classes. So it's the question of accepting the risk, but also the way that we look is to manage an overlay strategy to limit the risks to those that we're willing to take and not accept the risks that we're not Very simply, we get rid of all the risks that we don't want and just leave the ones that we do.
Thank you, Richard. 透过今天的访谈，我们可以听得出来 ，Richard 认为，其实投资呢，首重要控制的是风险，才能够在资金开始启动变化的时机，要稳住您的获利步伐。以上资讯提供给您，我是杨志杰，关键对话，我们下次见。